Howdy everyone, and welcome back. My name is Avram Plager, and today we'll be going over basic physics animations and some rendering. This is a copy of my previous video. I will be deleting that just to keep things nice and formatted well. I got a comment on the video that the background music was way too loud and there was a lot of static. Upon viewing the video, I did see that was true. I'm switching to a different screen recording application and changed some settings, and I think that this should be good. I will change the volume of the background music, and the static should be gone. So if that is not changed, please let me know in the comments. But with that, we'll get right into the video. So today we'll be going over the physics animation of rigid bodies. To go into physics animations, you go to this tab here. It looks like a circle with a secondary circle going around it, so click on that and you'll see this tab pop up, and you have some rigid bodies. So just to demonstrate kind of what we're going to be going over, although we'll be going over a little bit bigger tutorial in a second, just to show you guys basically what this does. If we press space on our keyboard, you can see that the animation player goes forward, but nothing happens. So to make something happen, we can go into our rigid body constraints, click on that. Don't change anything else, that's all we need to do for now. We'll see some different changes here in a second, but as you can see, if we press space, now that cube falls down, just like it would with regular gravity. If we wanted to make some additional changes, we'll shift this up, G and Z along the, to move it along the Z axis, and then we'll add in a plane. And we'll scale that up. Then we'll apply a rigid body constraint. And if we set this just as there, it would fall down, same with the cube. If we didn't want this to happen, we can set this as passive. And now if we press space, you can see the cube falls down, and it stays on the plane. If we wanted, we can set the surface response to be bouncier. We can set this to be bouncy as well. Now when the cube falls down, it bounces a bit. We can also set some friction, but since this isn't exactly sliding or rolling, this is not going to cause anything to happen. If we did want this to slide or roll, all we need to do is add in another cube. And we'll move this up a bit. Then we'll go into our edit mode, and we'll make a couple of cuts. We'll press K on our keyboard to cut from this vertex here, diagonally down to this vertex here. Make sure that it snaps to those vertices, and press enter once you make that cut. Now you can see we have a cut along there. Then we'll press K, and we'll do the same on the opposite side, making sure it snaps to the vertices that we want. Press enter to make that cut. Now we'll go into face select, and we'll select these faces. And we'll press delete to delete those faces. Then we'll go into edge mode, and we'll select all of these top edges here, and we'll press F to make that a face. And then we'll go back into object mode. You can see we kind of have a ramp there. We'll scale this up. We'll move it along the x-axis back. Then we'll take this, move it along the x-axis, and move it along the z-axis. And actually, instead of this cube, to make our lives a little bit easier, we'll move this along the x-axis out of the way. We'll take out its rigid body constraints, and then we'll add in an icosphere. Open up the icosphere panel here. Set the subdivisions up to about 4. 4 is enough, and increase the radius just a bit. Now move this icosphere along the x-axis, and along the z-axis. And you can kind of guess what we're going to do here. We're going to set a rigid body constraint, set it to active. You set the mouse a little bit up, then set the friction up, set the friction for this up, and set the bounciness down. Now make sure that this is also set to a passive constraint, and press the spacebar. Now you can see that has a little bit of friction, so it kind of slows down. If you want that to be more, you can set the friction for this up a bit. Make sure all the friction is set up. So now you can see, kind of slows down a bit more. If we wanted to make some collisions in here, we would set this along the x-axis and the z-axis. And make sure that it's not intersecting the plane. We know that the plane is right along our x-axis, so move that down just until it's barely touching. And now when we press the spacebar, you can see the animation plays. And this, since it doesn't have a rigid body constraint, does not make any changes. So make sure that you do set that to a rigid body constraint, active. And now when we press the spacebar, that moves the cube. And you see it kind of pushes the cube off. And now if we wanted, we can set the mass for this cube up. And now you can see it completely stops the sphere. If we wanted to set this, say, down a bit, just to 1 kilogram, and then set the mass for this all the way up, you can see it would hit that and just slide it out of the way with ease. And now, if we wanted, we can set the bounciness for this up, and the bounciness for this up as well. Set the friction down, set the friction all the way down for that, and set the friction all the way down for this as well. Now if we press play of the animation, you can see that really shoots it out of the way because it's very bouncy. So that's a good way to use physics animations. This is just the rigid body constraints. In my next video, I will go over some more of these. Soft body is similar to this. It has some of the same characteristics as rigid body, but it plays around with the geometry of the objects. One important tip when you're doing these physics animations to decrease the load on your computer, this is a fairly simple setup, so you don't really need to change anything here. But if you're doing this, make sure that this is set to box. What this does is it creates a container for the object and how different objects respond to it. So say for example we were set this to sphere. When we press play, it kind of responds to it as if it were a sphere, not as if it were a box. So make sure this is set to box. Also, this decreases the computing power for your device because it doesn't spend as much time trying to decipher how the object is formatted. With this, although it's not a perfect sphere, make sure that this is set, instead of convex hull, to sphere. Now you can see it kind of has some lines there. Now this will respond as a perfect sphere. Make sure this is set to convex hull, and then make sure this is set to box. Since this is not a box, we need to make sure it's set to convex hull. I'll display why that would be different if we were to set it to box. Here, if we were to set it to box, you can see that kind of protrudes there. So now if we do that, you can see it kind of responds as a box. So it stops at the top there, and not how we want it. So we'll set that back to convex hull. Now, for example, if you were to put in a very defined object, such as a monkey head, if we were to go here, we were to pop in a Suzanne, let's set that up a bit, and set that there. Rotate it around so it's facing us. Now this, if we were to set this as a rigid body active with a convex hull, that wouldn't really react very well with many objects, but you can see there's a lot of definition there. So the collision shape that we would need is mesh. Mesh creates an exact replica, basically like shrink wrapping it, and then that's defined as the surface response. So there, if we were to get that, that would very well respond to it. So just to demonstrate, we can have as many objects as we want in our animation. And for some reason it's bugging out on me. If Blender did have an update, which for some reason is causing it to cause some problems with this, so actually we will do a little bit more difficult. Blender can run into bugs. It is an open source program, so this can cause some problems. Although this is fairly simple how we want it set up. We can actually delete this and we'll add in another Suzanne. We'll rotate this again, 270 on the z-axis. We'll move this up along the z-axis, back along the x-axis, and that's good there. Now we'll set this as a rigid body active, set the mass up, set the bounciness up, and set this to mesh. Over there, if we play the animation, and nothing seems to be happening. The reason for that is most times the playback is not set to the first frame. Make sure that when you're doing these animations that the playback is set to the first frame, otherwise it doesn't react very well. If you do make any changes, you always need to set it back to the first frame. The way you do that is you press Shift and you go with the left num arrow on your keyboard, and that'll set it all the way back. Although if you want, you could just use these keys here. You can jump to the initial endpoint, or you can jump to the end endpoint. Go to play the animation, you can see here, kind of bumps everything out of the way, and then there we go. So that is just the part where we're going to go over of physics animations. You can play around with this however you want. You can add in as many features as you want. You can make this a lot more complex. You can have objects going in from different angles, however you want. So one thing I would recommend with this is definitely playing around with this as much as possible. I can't give you every scenario where you would put this in, so the most important thing to pretty much every concept in Blender is to play around with all these aspects on your own. And with that, we'll get into the rendering part of this video. So to render, we'll go into these 4 keys here. These are the different ways that you can display your objects. You have wireframe, which kind of shows just the edges. This is very good for seeing through objects. I use that a lot for kind of positioning and some minor editing. Solid is how you would normally see it. Viewport shading is somewhat like rendering, although it doesn't take as much computing power, so it doesn't render all of the textures, but it gives you some nice lighting features. And then here's the rendered view. This is where you're going to see exactly how your scene is going to look. So you can see that this light comes into play here. If we were to move that around, you can see that the lighting does change. If we were to change the brightness up by going down to the object data properties, we can set the power up. If we were to set that to say 10,000, now that's much brighter. Or if we were to set that down to 10, you can see that almost has no effect. So for this, the point light, I would say 1000 is usually the best lighting effect to do. Specular kind of determines how much it's going to react with objects. The radius determines the radius of the light. So with this radius of light, you can see a little bit different aspects. It creates some odd shading features. And if we set that down, you can see that that changes the way that goes. So I would say keep the radius down. 1 meter is usually enough. Not 14. 1 meter is usually enough because it gives you some nice vantage points, but it doesn't set the radius too much. Next you have sun. Sun is a much more powerful light. You can see there, it's harder to see any definition. So the sun, definitely set that down to like 20 or even 10. Or in some respects, you can set it down to 5 and it'd still be very good. I keep it usually at 10 and then I set the point, or even 30 is good. I set the point far away from the objects, so take this and say move along the y-axis, then move along the z-axis. One thing I tend to do is set it to aligned with the camera, so you can go kind of into your top viewpoint, then press G along the x-axis, and G along the y-axis, and then R along the z-axis, and move that there. Now you can see kind of its line with the perspectives there. We'll R along the x-axis. We'll set that there. Yeah, you can see that's kind of going towards the far edge there. And if you want to go into camera view, just press 0 on your numpad. Now you can see we don't have much vantage point here. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on the outside border of our camera here. We're going to click view. We're going to go to navigation and walk navigation. What this allows us to do is kind of walk around with our camera. You can use WASD as you would in like a normal video game. So S goes backwards, W goes forward, D goes right, A goes left. If it's not moving, use the scroll wheel on your mouse and scroll the scroll wheel forward, and this will make it go faster. If you want it to be slower, you can scroll backwards. If you want it to go slower but not change the speed of the traditional vantage point, you can press Alt and go forward in any direction, and it'll go slower, or you can press Shift and then go, and it'll go faster. I usually like to just change the direction it's going. Further commands, Q goes down, E goes up, and you can set how this camera views the object. So let's go back to our normal vantage point, but let's scroll out a bit so we can see the dimensions of that angle here. And we'll go back to our light using our pane here, and we'll set the strength down to 10. Now that's better. You can see the definition of a lot of the objects better. It's a little bit easier to see the objects. Angle determines how much of everything is lit up, so you can see about 100 degrees is usually good. That shows everything, but it still gives definition to the objects. You can see if you set specular down, it's not as good. Specular up is a bit better. And now let's go into the into how to color all of these objects. So we can go into material properties, and we'll just set up some basic materials. We're not going to mess around with too many features. In a future tutorial, I will show off all the different features of these shaders, but for now, we'll just go over basic color. So you can see if we can change the color of these objects. We can set this to red. And if you want to change the color of the object, just click New, and then Base Color. And then we can set this to blue. We can set this to yellow. And then we can set this to a purple color. This is kind of abrasive to the eyes, but just to show off the basic coloring features. And important to all of this is the rendering engine that you have. Eevee is a little bit basic, but it's good to kind of get a feel for what you're doing. I usually render things in cycles. Well, I render images in cycles. I don't render animations in cycles because cycles is a very complex rendering engine, but you can see that it looks much, much better. The definitions for everything is far clearer, although it's a little bit grainy because our sampling is turned down. It's down to 32. So say if we set that up to 100, we'd see that a little bit better. Although this does take a little bit longer to load, you can get a general feel for what everything is. So we'll switch back to Eevee for now, just to show off what's going on here. So you can see if we go around, if we switch around, you can see that the lighting goes weird. That is because it is processing the render, and if we stop moving, it kind of evens everything out. Don't mess around with anything else. I promise I will go over all these in a future tutorial, but that was just a good tutorial of some basic physics animations, and how to do some basic rendering if you want. And I hope this was very good. Thank you all for watching and subscribing. We recently surpassed 100 subscribers, which is just absolutely spectacular for me to see. That y'all are still watching my videos. I apologize that I haven't released one in a while, but I should be pretty frequent now with my videos. And I'll see you guys in the next video.